drinking times, and if you search Clearwater reuse drinking, things like that.
Great article, you know, and that's the sad part. We worked with the reporter for a good 2.5 weeks on getting the story right. We really extensively offered every piece of information she wanted. She talked to DEP, she talked to the Water Management District, she talked to some of you, she's talked to everybody. And she did what I consider the best article I've seen so far. She did a really great job. Unfortunately, the social media people got on it. So.
Actually, and since we're talking about it, Russell, you mentioned that part of being a hometown boy was that you were very accessible to your population. And David, you kind of mentioned the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested to hear from you guys. Well, know that for those bigger metropolitan areas that don't have that same kind of benefit, you know, how would you take your experience and then translate that over for somebody else?
Yeah, I will say this, most of the social media comments that you're going to see have nothing to do with anybody Clearwater. They're somewhere else. But that's okay, you know, we'll deal with it. But the people in Clearwater are really very pro this project, so far. Okay.
Amy, as far as dealing with that, I would say that it's going to be a lot more difficult for larger municipalities to be able to do that. And it worked for us because we're so small. And you know, how a larger municipality, larger area does that, the only way, the only thing I can think of is you need to engage people in the community that other people know and respect. Whether that's the mayor, whether that's some doctor, whoever that happens to be. It's the only way to make these things work is you have to gain the trust of the public. People don't trust government, whether it's federal government, state government, local government. They don't. But we were fortunate that we were small enough we could put a name and a face to that project. And we were able to garner the trust of the public. People were concerned, sure. And when we went live, I actually thought about going live 2 weeks ahead of time, and then 3 weeks later tell people we started. Surprise. But I think that would be kind of a little bit behind the curtain, so to speak. And I didn't want to damage the reputation that we had gained, and for being honest and upfront with everybody. So we didn't do that. And we, quite frankly, we thought the phones would start ringing off the wall the day we went live. TCEQ thought the same thing. The whole time we operated, the TCEQ got one phone call about the project. And it was from a guy in Dallas. It wasn't even in Wichita Falls. And I think we're able to do that because we talked to everybody. I mean, we've been on the 6 o'clock news, did the whole 6 o'clock news about the DPR project in Wichita Falls. It just worked out. I don't know how it works for San Diego or Tampa or anybody like that. All I know is it worked in our area, and that's, you know,
everybody knows that the term toilet to tap came from San Diego, so there are problems with big municipalities and getting that word out, but they learned from it. But at the same time, Orange County did the groundwater replenishment system. They reached out to the medical community, like you were mentioning, and getting those people you don't normally think about on board. So when critics come up, you have this real respected doctor. But San Diego learned from that, and now their project's successful. They just finished a demonstration. They brought in all those community members, the ones that were opposing it before. What was it? The Revolting Grandmas? It was some unusual name, a real name of an organization that were against it, and the surf riders and things like that all came back out and completely reversed their opinion once they got educated.
Any questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, Russell, your water demand was like 32 MGD before the drought, went down to 11 MGD during the drought. What is it now?
It's about right around 18 to 20. Killed our revenue.
I was just going to say.
I can tell you, we actually increased our rates 53% during that drought because we had depleted our reserves. We had to borrow money for the IPR, and we got 0 complaints from the public because they knew what we were spending the money for.
Now, I think also when you got no water,
Right.
some water looks really good.
Yeah. You know, you have people that would come up to you and say, I don't care if it costs $10 a thousand, do whatever you gotta do. So you got that mentality. But the revenue side of it, what we're able to do now is our new norm for budgeting went from 8 billion gallons of water a year to 3.5. And we got the rates up. And we should never go below that 3.5 billion gallons a year that we sell. So what it did do for us, it allowed us to get our rates set in such a way that we should never be below that floor again. I mean, we were deferring capital projects, we were killing a lot of stuff. But the drought being where it was and us being able to set the rates in the ground floor for our rate base now, we should be in decent shape.
I will say this. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. We found that during all of the other discussions we've had over the last 2 years, 3 years, with the folks within Clearwater that we've worked with, whether it be the homeowners associations or whoever, that as long as we took the tactic that we explained the one water concept up front. You know, we've done that every single time we've started one of these presentations to the folks out there in the system. You know, that one water is the way it really is. What you were thinking of in the past of different kinds of water for different kinds of purposes, no such thing, which is really what you were saying. We've been practicing this since Cleopatra's time. And really that's the speech we give them. And they scratch their heads, you can see the wheels turning, and they go, oh, I get that. So if you hit that, if you hit the water cycle, if you explain to them how it works, if you say, well, you know, imagine if you're New Orleans, okay? Just think about it. I usually have a little map and say, what about New Orleans? And we run down there, how many times, by the time it gets to New Orleans, if people use that water for every kind of purpose you can possibly imagine, people then say, oh, so we've been doing this. That's right. There's nothing new here. I said, oh, and he goes, when you see the article, that's really not my quote. She quoted me again. She didn't like my quote because it was too long, because I'm an engineer and I do those things. So she compressed it, and where the bottom line was, well, we're doing everything Mother Nature does. We're just building a box to do it faster, which is really exactly what we're doing. And I think once we got to that point with people, the interesting thing was, in every group I've ever done about this size, the first person, one of the people would go, let me ask you a question. Then why in the hell are we putting it in the ground? Why in the hell are we doing that? Why are we putting it in the water system? And the answer to that is, we're probably going to do that. You know, we're starting off with a replenishment project. That's what we envisioned back in 2008. Technology's changed, the amount of knowledge we have has changed, our ability to get the thing permitted has changed, and yes, we've still got some reuse water left. So we're going to build this facility. We are going to protect the aquifer in our area. We are going to benefit the aquifer. We're going to continue to do that. But we also are hoping to then move on to a direct flow project as well. And I will tell you, some of the very people that have raised their hand and said that have been doctors, which surprised me. Because they got it instantly. So, you know, and that also they were on board because when you sell the idea that this water is actually, you have to be careful how you do this one. Actually, this water has had things removed from it that drinking water doesn't currently do. You know, we're taking care of NDMA, we're taking care of dioxin, we're taking care of immunogenicity, pharmaceuticals, and believe me, everybody gets pharmaceuticals. Everybody knows that. So whenever we go to, you know, startups for the new water plants, that's usually the first question. What about pharmaceuticals? So when you tell them that this water, yeah, this water is not going to have that. They like that. So they get it. They see it. So the trick is one water, one water, one water. We've been doing it. There's nothing new. We're not doing anything special, except we're doing it in a space this big instead of, you know, the size of Florida. And we've got redundancy, redundancy, redundancy. We've got barrier, barrier, barrier. And yes, we're going to make sure it meets all the requirements before it goes anywhere. And we do these testing, and we got all this thing in place. And yes, we've thought it through. And yes, we've got doctors on board. Yes, we've got DEP. And, you know, when you do that, I have not yet had one group that turned on, not one. So far, so good.
I'll get to Alan's second, but it's interesting to me that in the discussion across the country is most of these first projects are going to 17, 19, 23 log removal of everything, way beyond the needs. It's interesting to me, you're going to a AOP, but the first one online, Wichita, you didn't even have AOP, you didn't even have UV. You want to address that at all? Is there
They're Texans.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't have a Simpsons episode afterward, no two heads or anything, right?
The TCQ said you have to have 8 log removal for Giardia, 9 for virus, and 5.5 for crypto, I think. And we demonstrated that all the way. It was all met prior to going through the RO. And we didn't know how long the drought was going to last. We knew we had to get the plant online. And one of the conditions of the approval from the TCQ was, well, if you operate for longer than 6 months, you have to install UV. Okay, let's get it approved, let's get it going, get it online. Well, the drought lasted longer than 6 months. So we had to wind up putting the UV in. I don't know why. It was for additional crypto removal, and maybe for some of the unregulated, to destroy some of the unregulated contaminants or something.
But you didn't do hydrogen peroxide.
No,
so you weren't doing AOP.
We started to play the political card. Had the senator and the state representative in the room ready to go, but chose not to go that way. Why, I don't know. That was a decision the mayor and the city council made, but they didn't want to play the political card. But so we installed the UV. Now I got two UV units that can treat 10 MGD a piece if anybody's interested.
It's only one, it's going twice.
Glad to sell.
Is it Trojan by any chance?
They're Trojan.
Oh, hey, we're good. Anyway, come deal here.
If they're on the market, they will be cheap. We only operated for about 3 months.
There you go. I will say this though, at least in these initial projects that we're going to get started in the state, having the ability to tell people that you're doing this extra, your MDMA and dioxin and all the rest of it. There's some value to that in the PR side of it. And luckily the UV and the peroxide isn't exactly a horrendously expensive part of the project, especially on our side. So the bottom line is I think there's some real benefit to having it, but like you, down the road, if the regulations change and we no longer require it, that's one thing. But I do like being able to supply water to my folks that I can say to them, MDMA, it's good stuff.
Just wait till the day they say, can you put some more ibuprofen in for my swing?
Well, you laugh, but I'm going through the fluoride issue right now. So
That's 20 years coming back. Hal, you had a question?
I did, for Russell. I was just curious, given the success you had on the temporary direct reuse project, local reuse, did you reconsider whether you wanted to do indirect or what was the thinking on that?
Not really, and the reason why was we were fortunate. We already had an MFRO plant built. It was built to treat Lake Kemp water. We knew Lake Kemp would refill at some point in time, and we didn't want to spend $90 million to build another MFRO plant. Second of all, it's expensive to treat it that way. You lose 25% of it through the treatment process, and putting it back in the lake, we could recapture everything. We have a pretty good I&I problem, so our permit's 16 MTD on average per day. So when the plant's flowing at 25 or 30, we have pumping ability to pump 25 to the lake. We can capture that storm flow. So we can capture more water. We can hold it in our bucket, Lake Arrowhead, which spills very infrequently, and just hang on to it.
But you don't have evaporation either.
We have a lot of evaporation. But people would ask me about that, and my answer to that was, well, if I used it direct potable,
You don't have that.
and use that to meet a demand, the water that would have met that demand got left in the lake anyway. So it's subject to the evaporation. So in my mind, evaporation was it was a non-player, non-starter. Follow me? So that's the reason we chose to go that way. Good question.
Orlando?
For Russell, what did you do with your concentrate from the memory?
We had a discharge permit into a river adjacent to Wichita Falls. It's an impaired water body. It's actually the Salty River upstream of Lake Kent, the brackish lake I was talking about. It actually runs through the city. We had a discharge permit from the regulatory body to discharge there.
How much were you just?
We were permitted for 6 MGD, and we were discharging about 3 of them.
Art? I have a question for Joanne. Our committee is Water Resources Reuse and Resiliency. And so with the climate change, we're going to need everything. So how do you think, I mean, something like 81st is kind of a backup to if you want to do direct potable reuse and say we get a year of lots of rain and then have somewhere to put the water, how that works with, helping you to gain some buffer and, it's kind of not just, sort of a side thing. I think it's important in conjunction with a direct potable reuse project. You need to have that kind of project as well.
Our goal is to stay self-sufficient, which means keeping and using our water within the city. So stormwater is part of that pie, and looking at direct potable for the future is part of it too. We supply our own groundwater now, but as that becomes limited, those are the sources we have left to look at for resiliency, to throw in the committee name.
I'd like to ask, well, first, I think it's interesting that we've got David with no other water supply, you're water limited, Wichita, water limited, and Joanne's able to, you have water, surface water, you're able to take advantage of that, and I think that's where it's going to go, and you're doing exactly what the region did in Tampa, which was tap all the resources you can until you don't have any more natural resources left, and then you go desalination, and now we're going to go to potable reefs, and that's the step progress, I think everybody across the state. One point is, you mentioned, Russell mentioned, lead with your education. And I know we're all on the bandwagon, but somehow we need to get it started. We talked about it, it's in 536, you and I mentioned it. It's a starter, but we need to get that started now. Joanne said it. We need to get the projects out front. It's going to take 5-10 years just to get these projects going, let alone educate the people. You're on the bleeding edge, David. Regulatorily, since we all know that, regulatorily, in Texas, what's different in Texas that allowed you to move ahead so quickly that, I don't know if we could do that in Florida?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Bart, I'm not exactly sure. We talked about a little bit about this on the phone, and I actually called the regulators, the director of water supply at TCQ before I came down, to ask her if she knew the difference between Texas and Florida. And I think the difference lies in the fact that in Texas, under the water rules, the water supply rules, there's a clause in there that allows them to use the rule of exception, which means if your treatment processes or your source water doesn't neatly fall into one of the categories under the rules, the regulatory body is able to approve you under the exception, provided you meet whatever criteria they put out in front of you. That's what I mentioned, the guidelines in my presentation. When we went down and met with them, they said, well, if you want to do that, you don't really fit neatly into these types of water sources, so here's the guidelines of what you have to do to be able to use that water as a water supply. And I'm not sure if Florida has that. Did they have that, Shannon, or not?
You're talking about the drinking, you're just talking about the source water for drinking water supply.
Right.
I unfortunately am not well versed in our drinking water rules.
And I don't think you do, because Linda Brookins was the director at TCQ that I talked to, and she said, I don't think that Florida does. And what surprised me was the regulatory bodies from different states aren't talking to each other. Everybody says, well, Texas did it, we did it real quick. Well, why isn't everybody calling Texas the TCQ to find out? I don't know. I'm not sure why. Now, I understand there's different regions, the EPA and states fall into different EPA regions, and I think Florida's in a different region than Texas. But, it's been done, it was successful, here's how we did it in Texas. Let's start there you know, I don't know why other regulators aren't talking to what.
Well, they are, there's a Association of State Drinking Water Regulators, ASWA. And I've been on there's a subcommittee in ASWA that's looking specifically at potable reuse. What can EPA do for the states? Do they want regulations? Most people don't. But
Right.
guidelines or something from EPA, and so the state regulators and drinking water do talk, but it is really hard discussion because the rules are so different. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
speaking Klingon versus,
I will tell you that in September, at the Water Reuse Symposium, we're going to do just that. We're going to bring regulators from all the states that are into potable reuse and bring them, including Florida, bring them down, have a workshop with them so they can give presentations, then we can have a discussion between them about how to move forward correctly, how best, what's best in California, what's best in Texas, what's best in Arizona, what's going on, so that maybe we can take the best from all of these collective regulators and try to move forward smartly. It seems like you have a great idea of the guidelines. I know one thing we all harp on is we need that. We need a guideline, a goal. Don't tell us how to get there. Tell us what you want at the end of the day, and we'll get there. We'll figure it out for us. But it's going to be different for Joanne, than from Clearwater, from anybody else.
No doubt.
Mark?
EPA has inconsistent application of the regulations throughout the U.S. In general, Region 9, which is California, says no to everything. In general, Region, I think 6, which is that Texas, says yes, and Region 4 says maybe.
All right.
let's talk about.
And then trying to work your way through the maze has been very problematic, so.
Well, what worked well for us was we got to the TCQ early and said, look, we want the same thing you do. We don't want this project to be unsuccessful. We don't want to create an unsafe drinking water. Let's get in the canoe together. Let's all row in the same damn direction. And quite frankly, there were some of the staff that after that meeting, they weren't on the project anymore at TCQ. The director got rid of it because all they wanted to do was dig their heels in and say, it can't be done. And Wichita Falls is going to run out of water. And TCQ is going to cause us to run out of water. And that, the next meeting, they weren't on the team anymore. And we got together and pulled the TCQ with us, brought them into the plant, said, look, this is what we do. They were amazed that we could probe RO units and find out where the O-ring had failed in the RO. They'd never seen it before. They didn't understand when you backwashed a microfiltration cell that the turbidimeter would get a spike because it had a little air bubble that got trapped into it. You got to throw that piece of data out. And they were impressed that we had a water quality task force meeting with the county health board every month about water quality. What are you seeing out there in the public? Are the cases of diarrhea going up? What are the hospitals saying? We were so involved with it that we felt like we had our finger on the pulse. And the TCQ, the regulatory body, didn't know any of that stuff. Get them into the tent with you quick.
Yeah, I will say that's one place we do have things the same, because on our project, from the very, very, very beginning, the inception of the project, the first place we went was to the two regulatory agencies that we deal with for water, was the Water Management District and DEP, and both have been working with us hand in hand on this thing all the way through, especially since everybody knew it was the first one. So I can't thank them enough, and they've been extremely supportive and very, very helpful all the way through. So for us, it's worked exactly the same way, and we made the same conscious decision. We weren't going to go come up with some ideas and bring them to DEP and bring them to the Water Management District. We say, jump in with us and help us on this.
The other agreement we kind of had on the side is, look, we're not going to involve the legislators up front. All they're going to do is slow everything down. We're not going to have them continue to push the TCQ to get things approved. Let's work together and I'll get this thing done, and basically that's it.
We're talking to EPA regions and different states. I'd like to hear from each of the panelists on, how can we as counties and cities, whether it be in Florida, and I'm interested if your neighbors called you, Russell, and wanted to know. So, I mean, how will we begin having these conversations with our neighbors effectively so that we can all get on one page before we really start doing state and national?
I think Russell said it best with just engaging the local community first and then working out. And you know, where we've had folks, if you get with the medical community, if you get with any university, with the IFAS here in the state of Florida, from the regulatory agency's perspective, the more work that is done, if you're looking at, say, comparing it to a permitting application process, all those pre-application meetings that you can have done before it comes to the regulatory agency, whether it be the district or the department, that's only going to serve you better. I'm sure David had a number of pre-meetings with the regulatory agencies before actually moving forward. So I think all the work you do up front really makes for an easier practice and actual application of a project coming to fruition.
I think the last thing you want to do is surprise anybody, any stakeholder at all. You don't want to have a surprise in this project, because that's where you will fail. Once you have somebody that's surprised, you're done. Because then they think that you're not being transparent. Transparency is everything.
Did your neighbors call you, Russell?
Neighbors as in,
Neighboring counties, neighboring cities, and wanted to know more about what you were doing and the process you went through? I mean,
yeah, quite a few, Amy. I've done this kind of talk in Phoenix. My operations manager's done in California, Iowa. We had a lot of people from across the country, Korea, Australia, the World Bank came to Wichita Falls to see the project. So we had a lot of, you know, we had these very frank discussions with those folks as well. And that's,
Do you have a map in your treatment plant showing all the countries that have come to the map?
Chuck a $10,000 bill to every one of the plants.
what the heck, the
You
guy
don't pay for this thing yet.
we had a guy from Hawaii come. When they called to set up the meeting, they said, I tell you what, instead of y'all flying over here, y'all can fly down. Tell you all about it.
That's great.
Florida's close.
Yeah.
One of those things that I haven't heard mentioned except by Russell was the health department. I can tell you that for any rule making that DEP does, the Department of Health is a very key partner in that, particularly for the reuse regulations. And some of the things, I know the reuse regs are kind of old, but some of the things that got written in there, the prohibitions of the edible crops, irrigation, the high levels of treatment requirement, multiple barriers of pathogen removal, a lot of that stuff was in there because of the Department of Health and their, you know, risk aversion, so to speak, obviously so. So that's one of the partners, if we're going to be going in the world of IPR and DPR is getting, particularly the epidemiology involved early.
Well, that's why I was glad to hear Dave say that he engaged doctors in the community, not only the government, that's one, but in the community that can stand up. And I know that was a process back in Orange County and elsewhere where they went out and they got people in local groups, and especially doctors, to sign that they would be an advocate. And then they would pick those people to go out in front of the public and say, I live here, I'm drinking it, I believe in it, here's who I am, come talk to me.
I'll tell you, the water that comes, the water that literally came, the finished water from our pilot plant. I mean, I think all of you have probably seen pictures of water, that glacial water, that, you know, that ice blue looking, amazingly looking, sparkling water. That's what this stuff was. And you take people out and show it to them in the pilot plant, they were amazed. Hell, I was amazed looking at it. It was fantastic looking water.
You know, you two mentioned something that occurs to me, and everybody, we're all guilty of this. We have a project, it's got to go out in the community, and what do we have to do? We have to permit it, we have to pull a public meeting. Nobody comes. And we go over and we have our little meeting, we look at the door, and we all talk to each other, and half the time nobody shows up. Sounds like that to be
Not this one.
death knell to this.
Not
We
this
need to
one.
get out, not only public, but we need to get out. We need to.
You can bring them in from the beginning, just like Russell said.
Any questions?
I have a question about, right now, the level of treatment that we're doing, especially on these initial projects where we have a lot of redundancy, maybe more than we need. Is there opportunity to track the cost to also educate the public on, well, we can have this level of water that may be overtreated, but there's, helps, I think, make people feel like they're safer, but if we do this, this cost to your rates, you have cheaper water, still safe. Is there opportunity for that? Because I think that's a lot of what the regulations are trying to prevent.
I'll be honest, from my perspective, I think if you offer people a less expensive and have to portray it as a quite not as safe alternative, I think it'll die. I think it'll kill it. I think on this, at least the first few projects, I think you're going to have to say, we are providing the ultimate level of safety that is known in the field, and look, we're putting it in. So by being first, we know that we're probably doing more eventually than will eventually have to be done. But right now, I think that is what has to be done. I don't think there's a choice in it. I think you do that because then you can look folks in the eye and say, whatever there is to be done, we're doing it.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of criticism of that though in California, like the groundwater replenishment system, everybody's saying that kind of set a bar.
Right.
That really, do we need to go to that level of treatment, especially with that project that's going back in the groundwater that wasn't even intended to be drinking,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, now anything we do more than this, even for direct removal, we gotta go to another level, so I don't, that is the danger of starting there. And I think you said earlier, we can't treat to the detection limit because that's always changing. And so if you have to tell them, I'm treating to non-detect, and then that changes, then there's going to be an expectation that you need to.
Yeah, and we're not portraying it that way. What we're saying is we're doing what the technology, what the level of technology allows at this time. So we're not taking any chances, and we're doing it. So to me, it's kind of like getting a car started. You got to give it a push, and then once you get it going, it doesn't take as much to get it going. I think we're the car getting started. Once this project gets underway, it's permitted, built, and it does what we say it's going to do, and no two-headed people show up, I think that is going to make things a little easier going down the road. But until that time, I don't know how you can get people, I don't know that you can say to people, we've got two alternatives here. This one's $28 million, and it does these, we have these barriers. For $20 million, I can do these, but I'm taking this barrier out. And I think that's going to be a rough one.
But it's the education not only of your water, but I think it's more education of what everybody in this room, everybody anywhere in this country ingests and comes in contact with on a daily basis.
Well, you don't want to fight that one.
No, but it's a reality of, your couches at home have fire retardant in them. You go sit on a plane and it's got more fire retardant, and you touch it, you ingest more in a plane ride than you'll ingest in a lifetime drinking water, and even though it's in water, and then the CECs that are in shampoos and soaps, that all you have to do, some of the research on that, all you have to do is aerate that. What do? You make foam, you wash yourself, it splashes up, it gets in the air, you breathe it in. You've got 1,000 times what you would ingest with the water. And that's the way we're going to have to deal with this. So you're already ingesting thousands of times in your daily life, in your daily routine. And it's a rough sell, but
Because nobody can tell you what level is harmful.
right.
They can't tell you. That's the biggest problem we're going to face with DPR is the unregulated is they're in there, yeah, but what level's of human health risk? Not to mention, once you take all that crap out, the hell are you gonna do with it then? In Texas, we don't have an ocean to put it in. I mean, it's difficult. RO is not the answer for West Texas. No place to discharge the brine. It's difficult in Texas. Everybody talks about taking all the pharmaceuticals out. Once you get them concentrated in something, then you got to do something with that.
Sell them back to the pharmaceutical
It's
companies.
Well, Shannon's point's so important too, is that the cooperation between DEP and DOH. I mean, because if you can get the Department of Health on board, that's really going to start to push the ball forward.
The other thing that we need to think
We do
about
not like risk. Period. Zero.
is the EPA testing methods for cryptogiardia viruses and that type of stuff. when we were operating, it was a 2-week window before we ever had a sample back because method 1623, we had to ship it off to
Timbuktu.
Timbuktu. It took a 3-week
4
turnaround.
labs in the country.
Yeah, there was 4 labs.
We all have that problem.
So, I mean, that's always an issue. And the 1623, there's 40 species of Giardia or crypto, but only 3 are harmful to human health. And the test only tests for, is it absent or present? They can't tell you if the cysts are viable or not. So you're spending millions of dollars, and because this one test comes back with 3 dead cysts in it that are of a species that's not even harmful to human health, you have to shut your plant down.
Of course, it's already gone.
That's the areas that as this thing evolves, that testing and EPA, that kind of stuff needs to change as well.
I think we've all, the study that was done and brought forward some of those very same concerns here in Florida. The regulations are going to have to be written to deal with all of what we're talking about here eventually. And it's an opportunity for us this time around to try to make them realistic and really try to make them make sense. The problem with the regulatory framework, and I know you guys have been working hard to try to cull it down, but you've got multiple rules that address the same thing, and it just creates all kinds of problems. Because you can meet this rule but not meet it over here and do the same thing. We're going to have to bring all those rules up, at least pertain to this, and do it right the first time. Hopefully.
We got a question in the back.
Hi, David, Jan McLean City Team.
Howdy.
Hi. On your list of permits that you're having to consider addressing,
Yeah.
is a water use permit on the list?
Yep. And luckily, the Water Management District is one of our partners in this.
So did you get funding from the state
We got it from the Water Management District.
water management district?
They're funding 50% of the project.
Well, how much funding did you get from Wichita Falls?
You're not going to tell us. That's what he goes, look at that smile.
What, is that grant money or what is it?
It is.
We can get any grant money. Ours is loan. We have to pay it back.
See, you should be in Florida.
No, we didn't get SRF money.
You want to get annexed into Florida?
Dave, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Are they talking about duration?
Well, Emily, I don't, we're not there yet.
No, not,
Not
but
there.
20 would be great, but you gotta have this.
20.
Yeah.
But if we can.
But we have now.
yes. You will, okay.
Well, hell, I'll take some more if you get it,
Can you explain that? You're having to get a water use permit to use the water that
to
you
take.
put in there, that you produced from the ground and take it back out?
You heard the senator earlier. We want to increase the capacity of our existing wells. That's the whole reason. One of the reasons for doing this. So yes, it's going to require.
So along those lines, I have a question for Ryan. We've been doing finished water ASR for 15 plus years at least. Going to raw water, stormwater ASR. Where do you see the regulations going with the reclaimed water ASR?
It's interesting. I mean, the changes to 62610 could be expansive. It's been a while. The department actually has a reuse coordinating group that has met in the past that we are internally speaking about getting together again for that very practice exercise. And we've been working with the senator in preparation for next year. Again, the outgrowth of 536. So where 62610 goes is really the conversation that we're looking to start now. And because again, absent the water bill and the other rule promulgations that we're going to have to begin and commence, that's right up on the list.
Let me ask a question. I'm surprised no one's asked this question. So what is this thing that we're building? Is it fish or is it fowl? Is it a water plant? Is it a wastewater? Anybody think about that one? That was the first thing we tried to determine. I tell you, it took us a while, but
Get a PWS
at
number.
the moment,
And we'll make it a water.
well, we already know. At the moment, we've been told it's a water plant. So really then, the 62610, is that the one?
Right.
You see, and that's the question. What is it? Is it fish or is it fowl? It appears to be fowl. I'm a wastewater guy, so for me, it's gonna be. So, my wastewater people, initially, we thought it might be wastewater, we weren't sure. We thought, well, it might be water, but we're not sure. So we've been building or growing dual licensed operators to operate this thing. And one of the recommendations in the bill is the construction of a training facility, which we'd love to have, by the way, a training facility to train the operators going on into the future so that we'll have a supply of these. Because I don't know about how many people here have RO. Can you get RO operators? It's getting harder and harder and harder to get people that have RO experience because we're all sucking them up. We all got new plans. So the question is, what do you have to train these people to do? Well, do they need to be water operators who are familiar with dealing with water operations in RO? Yeah. Or should they be wastewater people that have wastewater experience so they understand what the difference is from their source water? Well, yeah. So we're trying to build our own folks that have both water and wastewater experience and can then deal with this facility once we get it up and running. Quite frankly, we're not really sure how to do that yet either. But we're trying to make sure they got both water and wastewater experience and dual licenses. So that's where we are at the moment. That's another hurdle we're going to have to deal with and another rule that's going to have to be addressed.
Senator Simpson talked about a reclaim bill.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious. And maybe you don't get a reclaim bill, Russell, but what would be on your wish list? And that would be it. If you have something to give to Senator Simpson right now and what needs to be considered or be a part, what would your answer to him be?
Well, first he needs to start with the 536 bill report because a lot of it's there. But for me, I think you went over, the biggest impediments right now for these kinds of projects from the inception is how do you, what rules do you comply with? Because that sets the stage for what testing do you have to do, what demonstration do you have to do, what kinds of costs do you have to incur, how do you do, this stuff, feasibility studies. I mean, you have to make a lot of assumptions right now, and it's not based on anything in the rule. So I think rulemaking is a really important part of this, and addressing all rules, not just 610, but whatever else this thing is. I don't know, there's not going to have to be a new section. I don't know. What is it? Well, hybrid or something clean and new. I don't know. Seems like every time we try to hybridize rules, we end up with the worst of this one and the worst of that one.
It was interesting to hear Senator Simpson bring up the KEYS funding, the $10 million for 20 years. The KEYS funding this year in the legislature, it might have been a preview of an idea he has in terms of at least funding from a state level alternative water supply. If you start to put on a 10 to 15 year, $15 million a year for alternative water supply through one.
Well, that won't even do the planning.
I get it, but I mean, in terms of what's currently there, I mean, at least it's a...
Our pilot work alone and getting to that point with the feasibility of the pilot work was $3.7 million.
Sure.
Well, I think what you're saying is some type of rider like that, it may be 50 million, who knows what it is. Questions?
Bart, I'm just listening to the discussion and looking at the title at the bottom of your slide right there, and perhaps the answer is staring us right in the face right there. Integrated one drop of water, one set of regulations, one set of laws.
I've said that before, John. I think eventually in Texas, there won't be a wastewater treatment plant and a water treatment plant.
I agree. I think
or a
that's
potable water treatment plant. It'll be a water treatment plant.
And that's, I would agree. I think that's where we're going because I think it's crazy not to.
Do you all know how the Water Reuse Association was created 20 years ago?
Around the table with guys drinking beer? No.
Yes. We had, a set of laws, say drinking water laws on our drinking water side. We had the American Water Works Association organized to support that, provide the professional support for that. Did a wonderful job. We have the water pollution laws, the water discharge regulations, the Clean Water Act, and we had the Water Environment Federation dealing with that. And they would say, yeah, we treat water to high standards so we can discharge it to the environment. And the American Water Works Association and the Safe, yes, we take the water and we treat it to drinking water standards. And in between, it wasn't fish or fowl. And that was the genesis in California 25 years ago of the water reuse. So they picked up the ball and ran with it. So and it seems like we've come full circle now with this whole thing. So
I think
go for it, Clark.
the key to the future is the one water concept.
One water.
One water.
One water.
And I've had several discussions with EPA, and I know EPA moves slow as molasses, so I can't wait on them, but they are having the discussions. And one of the things, talking with someone with under the Clean Water Act program, someone with the Safe Drinking Water Act program, they're thinking, I mean, those two acts were never meant and fundamentally do not interact with each other. And when you have all the rules that kind of filter down from those, that's why you have all these different rules that don't seem to work together. And it kind of goes all the way up the pyramid to the top. But they are having the discussions, they recognize it, and I'm doing my one little part with I'm the SRF drinking water program, and we're looking to fund a reuse project under the drinking water SRF program. It's just a tiny little piece, but it helps.
Any question?
Yeah, so under this one water concept, isn't there some risk to selling these first initial projects and maybe developing a single rule of going to such high levels of treatment for reuse when it's really belts, suspenders, really redundant, and then looking at it, that could also lead to a higher level of treatment required for drinking water?
Yes.
That becomes the expectation.
Actually done correctly, it shouldn't. It should do the exact opposite. The one water concept says there's one kind of water.
Yep.
Now what you can do is think of it as a continuum. You can move anywhere up and down that continuum. We have the technology to do that. But what you do, and this is from the water management district side of it, use the lowest quality water in that continuum for the purpose that is appropriate for that use. Sure. So what you do is you have a continuum, we have the technology, and get everybody to agree that we can move up and down that continuum, and then what determines where you stop along the line or along the circle is the purpose at which you plan to use that water and the cost at which you can afford to do it. So, someone may say, well, I want to have direct potable reuse in my community, but when they get on there and start looking, and they realize that they get water for $3.10 somewhere else, and it's $8.20 to do, direct potable, maybe they're not going to do it. But if it's somebody else in the right set of circumstances, they say, well, here, I can stop them there, this part of the continuum.
But I think
Tim,
that's
you
where
had
you
a
get into
question?
trouble. I think that's where you get into trouble if direct potable reuse is only looking at UV, RO, and it costs $10 per thousand. Then it doesn't look like it's a feasible option when we're not really looking at a fit for purpose treatment.
So we have to be goal-based, we have to be very careful in these new rules and not be prescriptive, not say you have to follow these, absolutes. You have to, this is what we want to see. In this testing, this is what we want to see. The question at the end of the day is, and I know it's a worry for everybody, is that these first ones that get out of the gate, they're going to set a high bar. And so how are you going to back up from, well, there's nothing in this water. Well, there is, we know there is. But you can't test for it today. 10 years from now, you'll test it. So it's a little dirty lie that we know. But how are you going to back up from there? So, well, but, a nanogram of that isn't going to hurt you. Look, you drink, 2 grams of it in your coffee every day.
Particularly when we have success stories like that UV not operating
Right,
for
and that's
6
the reason
months.
we had to add the UV. It's because Big Spring got ahead of us. Big Spring had UV required. We slid in, says, hey, we're only going to operate 6 months. Don't worry about UV, but if you operate longer than 6 months, you're going to be considered permanent. We already required it down here for Big Spring. So you got to put the UV.
But that's not science-based.
And that's exactly what George is talking about. There's a study in Texas done by Alan Plummer Associates that talk about all the different treatment processes for DPR. And what we did is way above and beyond what really needs to be done. And if you set your regulations that automatically require MFRO, UV, and AOP, or whatever you said a while ago, Bart, that's the standard, and that's what you're going to be held to, and that's what's going to drive the cost up.
One thing in Altamont we're hoping to do with our pilot study is to look at alternative treatment technologies that won't produce a concentrate like biological filtration and advanced oxidation without eliminating the membrane portion of it, because we don't have concentrate disposal, we don't have an ocean, we don't have brackish groundwater, we don't have anything, so it's not going to go. But I see, your point, I think, is that if we set the standard so high for reclaimed water, then we go back and look at our drinking water that doesn't meet that standard. How do you defend that? How do you defend that you have a drinking water that's full of pharmaceuticals because it's at a level that's not going to hurt you?
Water's got everything, at least in.
Yeah.
Backfire on us,
And-
it's
and I-
like-
and it's unfortunately, it's one of those conundrums, because you're not gonna build the first plant now, unless you take it to the extent that other folks have done it. You're just not. You're not gonna build it.
We're not going to build the second one either without.
Well, hopefully, as time goes on, if you design the rules in a way that you say, it's gonna be a case-by-case analysis of the requirement based on, scientific fact, instead of just a hard, fast rule. I mean, that's what I'm saying. There should not be a hard, fast rule that has a table that says, if you want to do this, this is what you do. It should say, these are the goals and objectives you got to meet. It's going to be safe water, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And then how you get there is in your report, and you demonstrate it, and DEP makes a decision based on it.
Maybe we have to go back and educate everybody, just as you said, and everybody up here said. It's been done 100 different thousands of years, and there's a report out of Texas utilities and Arizona utilities that become 100% reuse, indirectly, or actually indirectly, because in dry times, 100% of the river flow they're pulling off of is wastewater effluent. So,
They've been doing it for a long time.
right, so there's no problem there. There are no dead bodies, there are no epicenters of cancer or other things. So here we go, we're gonna call it, as you said, now we're gonna put a label on it, and all of a sudden now we gotta build this gargantuan regulatory structure around it, because we call it something else, when many parts of the country, they're just putting a regular old water treatment plant, pulling it out, and all it is the exact same effluent.
It's 4 o'clock, and so we're going to take Tim's question, and I think I saw one other person who had a hand up over here. We have time for one more after Tim. Who's it going to be?
Not a real question, but I'm just picking up on some of the things that have been said. And I know that we get, if we're going with a one drop of water, many uses thought. And the confusion is it a water treatment plant? Is it a water reclamation plant? Is it a wastewater plant? Somebody mentioned earlier, it's a water purification plant. Regardless of what it is, it's just where we are on that cycle.
Wherever you
And
stop.
perception is reality to a lot of people. So as an industry, maybe we need to embrace and not stand in our own little camps and embrace the one water.
You're absolutely right. Where you stop is to be dependent on where you need discharge, use the water, whatever the purpose is of the water. But it's all the same water, it's just water. I know it's a pretty unusual concept for all of us that have been in business a long time.
So what you're saying is where you start, or where you stop's important, not where you start.
Well,
What you're gonna do with
yeah,
the
what you're
water.
gonna do with the water is wherever you start, wherever you end up, and where you start with will depend on what treatment level you have. So if you start with what is already real high quality reuse water, you've got one set of criteria. If you start with sewage directly on a green pastures plant, that's a different answer. But it's one water.
Thank you for a very successful panel discussion.